This is going to be your guide for the updated egg hatches in Pokemon Go. So we have 2, 5, and 10-kilometer eggs with the Johto update coming to you guys from Cerebi. So I will have links in the description below for you guys to check out this for yourself. You don't have to come back to this video, just click on a page and you're going to be good to go. So starting off with the 2-kilometer eggs, we do have these starter Pokemon once again, trying to make these starters accessible and not make the 2-kilometer eggs absolutely junk, even though there are some pretty fun Pokemon inside of these eggs right here. So I'm just gonna go over it and then give my opinions about this. We're also going to go a little deeper when you think about it, because some of these eggs are going to be very powerful for understanding some of the strongest Pokemon in the game. Like Scizor is actually going to be Scyther, which is a 5-kilometer egg. So trying to pinpoint this will be pretty good as you go and understand more about what's going on through this guide. And also we're going to look into the implications as to what is going on with the Pokemon egg hatches. So bringing a lot of sources right now, but when it comes to the 2-kilometer eggs, it's not going to be like super exciting. We have Spinarak, Cleffa, Igglybuff, Togepi. So we have some of the baby Pokemon right here, and then also going into a few other Pokemon as well, such as Apom and Misdreavus. So these Pokemon actually get an evolution in the 4th generation, so going to be fairly not that fantastic right now, but might be able to get a pretty powerful buff as we get later onto it. And then Slugma and the Remoraid. So the 2-kilometer eggs, pretty much just grab your starters and get hype about that. Next up are the 5-kilometer eggs, and like I said earlier, we do have Scyther in this batch, and Scyther is still going to be a pretty solid Pokemon to go and hatch with, so you can get the Scyther candy and then end up using it for the Scizor. And as we scroll through, Eevee as well. Eevee is always a good Pokemon for those 5-kilometer eggs. You can actually name your Eevees and do the Eevee trick to get an Espeon or an Umbreon. So you will want to nickname your Eevee Sakura for the Espeon and Tamao for the Umbreon. And as we scroll through, we can see that some of these will have implications in future generations. So pretty much what we saw is that Blissey gets super overpowered busted with the Johto update, so it is kind of worth paying attention to some of the previous generation Pokemon that can evolve into future Pokemon as well with the eggs. So 5-kilometer eggs, still fairly useful. Now as for the Johto Pokemon coming out of the 5-kilometer eggs, we have Chinchou and we also have Pichu. So Pichu going to be the way of getting Pikachu, so now we can see some other baby Pokemon being integrated into the 5-kilometer eggs. A lot of people are hyped for the Quagsire. Like, I've just been seeing a lot of Quagsire memes and excitement, so that is where you're going to get your Wooper. Tyrogue is going to be for the Hitmontop, and then we also have the Elekid and the Magby. So 5-kilometer eggs, pretty understandable mixed levels of power. Some of these Pokemon are pretty solid, others they're just okay. And then we go into the 10-kilometer eggs. So these are where all the bad boys are, like that Chansey. So still going to be pretty powerful for those eggs right there. But when we get into the Pokemon that are going to be for Johto, we have Mareep, Sudowoodo, Pineco, Gligar, Heracross, Skarmory, Smoochum, and Larvitar. I don't know how to feel about these. Like, a lot of these do feel like they should be 5-kilometer eggs, such as the Pineco and the Sudowoodo. I guess Ampharos is supposed to be a fairly strong Pokemon. Heracross and Skarmory as well. Smoochum. We have a baby Pokemon in the 10-kilometer egg, so it seems like you do have a chance of getting a little bit of a dud. But then there's the Larvitar. So that is going to be one worth farming for sure. But then when you compare it to the 10-kilometer eggs in the 1st generation as well, there were some Pokemon that were hit and miss. Like, it was mostly try to grab the Snorlax, try to grab the Lapras, and only did Chansey become relevant later on. So it seems like we do have a nice little bit of an assortment right here. People are looking forward to the Heracross. The Ampharos is one of the favorites for many Pokemon as well. Kind of pick it up through your original, like when we're talking about Gold and Silver version, pick it up through your playthrough, and I think a lot of people do have an attachment to the Ampharos because of that. And then Larvitar is going to be pretty awesome, and that's what I was kind of alluding to earlier on in this video. So now what we can do with these egg charts are figure out some of the strongest Pokemon in Pokemon Go after the Johto update. As we can see right here, we have Espeon and Tyranitar as two of the strongest offensive Pokemon with insane amounts of attack. Interestingly enough, Espeon having a higher attack than Tyranitar, but Tyranitar has a pretty good balance of stats overall, more hit points, and also a bit more on that defense. It's looking pretty powerful on some of these Pokemon right here. As you can see when we scroll down, the Scizor is a Pokemon, and the Heracross, surprisingly just pretty powerful right there. So we are going to get a good mix of power, and the Ursaring. So Teddiursa is a Pokemon to pick up. I actually wasn't paying attention where the Teddiursa is on the eggs. If you can actually hatch one right now. So yeah, it looks like Teddiursa is just going to be a wild encounter and not found inside the eggs. So that's going to be a little bit of power for getting yourself an Ursaring right there. Some other things we can look at, like the hit points, as we're just Blissey reigns as king. But then we also have the Wobbuffet and the Wigglytuff. So we have Igglybuff, we also have the Wobbuffet, and then Lantern. So getting a fair amount of representation across all of the generations so far right now. That, yeah, the Chinchou might not seem like a very strong Pokemon to get, but still has a solid amount of hit points. And then the other stats are fairly balanced as well. So we're going to see how the tier list goes. Pretty much people do like sticking to those very powerful Pokemon, but it's also good to see if one of your favorite Pokemon is fairly usable, durable, or just has a surprising amount of power behind it as well. So it's not going to be a complete waste on most of these egg hatches as we go down on the list. We can also go and check out a Pokemon for its defenses. Naturally, Shuckle is going to be the highest defense Pokemon by a lot. Low attack, low hit points, so Shuckle really kind of fitting its theme right there. Steelix also showing a good amount of defensive power, solid amount of hit points, and a really high amount of defense. So it's kind of interesting because Onix is revered as one of the worst Pokemon out there for a fully evolved Pokemon, and we could kind of understand that as it gets more evolutions in future generations, maybe it will be useful. So Steelix holding down with some crazy stats, and we have Mantine, Skarmory, and Umbreon. Umbreon, it's kind of the mirror to that Espeon right there with a really high amount of defense, solid amount of hit points, but pretty low on the offenses. And that's just kind of showing the balance of some of the Pokemon that we can find right there. Donphan also looking to be a pretty solid tank. I've seen some conversation and discussion on the Reddit, kind of seeing where Donphan's power lies as a defensive Pokemon for a gym. So we can kind of compare the Donphan to some other ones and have a solid time. The Fortress also ranked pretty high as well. We can also go and look at the Sylph Road. So bringing us an interesting study. Sylph Study number 6, published in December. So before we had even an idea of when the Johto update was going to be, after the changes, you know, can you still hatch the evolved forms of Pichu, Cleffa, Magby, Elekid, Igglybuff, and Smoochum? These were the changes that came after we had the baby Pokemon introduced from the second generation, kind of slowly bringing in the Johto region. But after hatching a lot of eggs, no Sylph researcher has hatched any evolved Pokemon with a baby after December 12th, and no Sylph researcher has hatched any regional Pokemon during this study. So that's kind of the big deal right now, is that, yeah, regional Pokemon, you can't hatch them. So if you see someone talking crap about hatching a regional Pokemon from an egg, it's just not happening. Same with hatching Pokemon after December 12th that have a baby form. So now you're going to have to get the baby form to evolve it and stuff like that. Thus playing around with the metagame and Pokemon accessibility from even months ago. That just kind of shows why looking at all of these charts are going to be pretty important, such as the Igglybuff and Cleffa, that these are going to be the ways of getting the evolutions such as Clefairy and Jigglypuff if you wanted to get a hold of these Pokemon. It's also why I thought Smoochum was fairly interesting for the 10-kilometer egg, because that's the only way of getting Jinx. And Jinx wasn't really that revered as a powerful Pokemon, so it's kind of cementing in what is going on. But the Heracross, as we saw in some of those other charts, actually a surprisingly powerful Pokemon. So the egg balance, I would say, is pretty good right now, and those are going to be the charts of what to expect, and then my input as to what you can kind of take from this is like, alright, what strong Pokemon are we looking for? How does this play with the other generations, and how do we move on from here? Because Gligar might be okay if you hatch some Gligar, get some Gligar candy, because 4th generation, whenever it happens, that is going to be a Pokemon that can evolve into maybe something pretty scary. Now, a quick point at the end of this video, I do feel like the video was a little heavy-handed with the best and strongest and most optimal eggs and stuff, but overall, I just kind of want to use this as a resource, as a guide to kind of show you guys where to go. Go on to Cerebi. They have a ton of information that'll pretty much answer any question that you probably have about Pokemon Go. So that's something. Also, you can go and look up the eggs. So if there's a specific Pokemon that you are targeting, that is definitely something that you can use for yourself. Might be a huge fan of Misdreavus or Slugma, or you are waiting for that Apom to go and turn into an Ambipom in future generations. Even though it feels like a lot of the community is going for like the super hardcore, almost competitive Pokemon Go play, for the most part, the average player is going to try to play for themselves and try to bring the Pokemon that they want to bring, because it is Pokemon in real life. It is that representation of themselves. Like, yo, if I was a Pokemon trainer, I want to have this Pokemon, and I want to make him the best that he can be. So there is like the two sides of that you can use this for both just casual play, doing whatever, but also you do have to understand the competitive aspects as well. That way you don't get completely rolled by gyms and other trainers, and you can kind of keep up with what's going on. So it is good to understand some of these stronger Pokemon and the listings of what you're probably going to expect and how to incorporate that. So if none of these super meta Pokemon end up being in your top 6, it kind of shows that you can expect some of these other really powerful Pokemon and try to formulate a way to either make counters or maybe adapt them so you can tolerate one of these super crazy Pokemon that end up just kind of like busting onto the scene. Well, if you can tolerate them, then that might be worth just kind of adding to your team for balance and stuff. So there's a lot of different aspects to what is going on with Pokemon Go right there. A new generation, new excitement, and then just all the Pokemon that have been found through the eggs so far. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.